Good evening. On behalf of the Initiative for Information Arts and Culture Development in Nigeria, I welcome you to day 6 and our final discussions to round up the 2020 Nobel Dialogue Series. Today, we will be discussing the accomplishments of the World Food Programme, this year's Nobel Prize laureate, and its effort to combat hunger, as well as their contributions to improving conditions for peace in conflict-affected areas. To commence the program, I'll please like to invite Ambassador Ayola Olukani to give the opening remarks. Ambassador Ayola Olukani had a distinguished career as a diplomat with the Nigerian Foreign Service spanning 35 years, during which he served in the Permanent Mission of Nigeria to the UN in New York, Permanent Mission of Nigeria to the UN in Vienna, Permanent Mission of Nigeria to the UN in Nairobi. He was Nigerian ambassador to Australia with concurrent accreditation to New Zealand, Fiji, Nauru, Tonga, and other island countries in the Pacific region. He served as well in Nigerian embassies in Tel Aviv, Nairobi, amongst others. He is currently the Director General of the Nigerian Chamber of Commerce, Industry, Mines, and Agriculture, NACIMA. Most importantly, he is also a distinguished member of the executive of IACD. Good evening, Ambassador. You have the floor now, sir.
The chair of the BOT, Professor Ayabanjo, the president of the IACD, distinguished other members of the BOT and distinguished panelists, I say good evening to all of us who have logged in to this particular segment, the last in the series of the Nobel series of the IACD. I feel honored to have been invited to make this brief remarks. Like Madefemi said, I served in 3 of the UN headquarters, the Permanent Mission in New York, the Permanent Mission in Nairobi, and also the Permanent Mission in Nairobi in Kenya, and was closely involved with the work of the United Nations and its systems in context of the search for peace, because peace is key and very important as far as our world is concerned. Even peace from in our home, in our nation, we all know this is very important. And we'll remember that in the heat of the Second World War, as it was the final phase of it, even when the nuclear bomb was still being exploded, the initiative started to come up with an international organization which will, of course, ensure peace across the world and between nations. And if you look at the preamble of the Charter of the United Nations, it talks about we, the peoples of the world, to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war, which has destroys us twice, with millions of lives were lost, and that to also practice tolerance amongst ourselves, and also to ensure peace with each other, unite our strengths to maintain international peace and security. All of these are encapsulated in the preamble of the Charter of the United Nations. Implicitly, the question and issues of peace is key and very important. And of course, against the background of that, once you have peace, then you can follow development. And like I said, in all the UN agencies, in all the UN missions, headquarters where I serve, like I said, New York, Vienna, that deals with the question of the nuclear issues, development in terms of the work of UNIDO, and all of us. The peace is key and very important. It's very central to the work of the UN and also to any human endeavor. So that is why I think this is the right thing in the right direction as far as the issue of this year is concerned. We are very delighted that the WFP, of course, has won this year Nobel Peace. And of course, this is not the first time the UN or any of its agencies is being bestowed with the Nobel Peace. The UN itself has won it under Kofi Annan and also all of us. And if you look at the work of the UN in the area of peacekeeping operations, you will discover that UN peacekeeping operation is a very, very potent symbol in terms of peace across our world. And you will know, you remember that, and I was in New York 2000 when the question of the reform of the Brahimi report in terms of peacekeeping operation was also taken on. And this was after the crisis in Rwanda, that despite all the effort to ensure peacekeeping among warring parties, what went wrong? And that was why and where the whole question and issues of peace enforcement, and we must also enforce peace to get at peace. The idea came in, and that UN peacekeeping operations must not just be left to the warlords, that if it becomes necessary, UN peacekeeping operations must also enforce this. But beyond that, there was also the idea of peace building commission, that before war and fighting conflict starts, let us also have an outfit. And that was why the United Nations established the UN Peace Building Commission. All of this shows the importance of peace as far as our world is concerned, in terms of us to be able to build on development, to have a peaceful world, to pursue development. But tonight we are looking at the WFP, and why was the WFP, of course, given this award? I'm sure the panelists will tell us more. But simply to say that, indeed, like it says, if you look at the WFP and also how to work with them in some of those places, you're talking about the largest humanitarian agency assisting 100 million people in 88 countries to provide meals, to support each and every one of them in terms of the school meals. And of course, this became more and more important against the background of the COVID pandemics. Implicitly, the WFP as a UN agency came up and did very well, credible work to be able to help, especially needy countries, as far as this is concerned. And if you look at the budget this year, they said for the first time the WFP was able to rake in as far as about $8 billion. $8 billion. This is an indication of the confidence as far as the WFP itself is concerned and the work we are. But despite that, there is still a shortfall of about $4 billion. But the long and short of what I'm saying is that for the WFP to have won the Peace Award this year, it means that
ladies and gentlemen, it appears there's a technical hitch right there with the chairman giving his opening address. I fear he will try to
work on.
Kindly bear with us. I'm sure the chairman will try to get back.
I'm just rounding up, sir. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, now I'm rounding up with this phrase.
But by all means, we just momentarily lost you, but you can go on.
Yes, I'm rounding up with this phrase, that the fact that the WFP won the World Peace Award is a confirmation of the fact that in the search for peace, multilateralism is key and very important. On all the multilateral agencies of the United Nations and other international organizations have a very important role to play. I wish all of us a very successful, no nation can go it alone. I wish all of us a very, very successful celebration at the end of this, especially at this particular period, as we are coming to the end of the Nobel Week. Thank you very much. I feel highly honored. And so my apologies for the technical hitch. I hope my message was quite clear. Thank you. Thank you, Femi. I will now hand over back to our moderator, to our technical personnel.
The need for international solidarity and multilateral cooperation is more conspicuous than ever. The Norwegian Nobel Committee has decided to award the Nobel to the World Food Programme for its efforts to combat hunger, for its contribution to bettering conditions for peace in conflict-affected areas, and for acting as a driving force in efforts to prevent the use of hunger as a weapon of war and conflict. The World Food Programme is the world's largest humanitarian organization addressing hunger and promoting food security. Last year, the WFP provided assistance to close to 1 who are victims of acute food insecurity and hunger. In 2015, eradicating hunger was adopted as one of UN's Sustainable Development Goals. The WFP is the UN's primary instrument for realizing this goal. In recent years, the situation has taken a negative turn. In 2019, 135 million people suffered from acute hunger, the highest number in many years. Most of the conflict. The coronavirus pandemic has contributed to a strong upsurge in the number in countries such as Yemen, the Democratic Republic of Congo, Nigeria, South Sudan, and Burkina Faso. The combination of violent conflict and the pandemic has led to a dramatic rise in the number of people living on the brink of starvation. In the face of the pandemic, the World Food Programme has demonstrated an impressive ability to intensify its efforts. As the organization itself has stated, until the day we have a vaccine, chaos. The world is in danger of experiencing a hunger crisis of inconceivable proportions if the World Food Programme and other food assistance organizations do not receive the financial support. The link between hunger and armed conflict is a vicious circle. War and conflict can cause food insecurity and hunger, just as hunger and food insecurity can cause latent conflicts to flare up and trigger the use of violence. We will never achieve the goal of zero hunger unless we also put an end to war and armed conflict. The Norwegian Nobel Committee wishes to emphasize that providing assistance to increase food security not only prevents hunger, but can also help to improve prospects for stability and peace. The World Food Programme has taken the lead in combining humanitarian work with peace efforts through pioneering projects in South America, Africa, and Asia. The World Food Programme was an active participant in the diplomatic process that culminated in May 2018 in the UN Security Council's unanimous adoption of Resolution 25 explicitly addresses the link between conflict and hunger. The Security Council also underscored UN member states' food assistance reaches those in need and condemned the use of starvation as a method of warfare. With this year's award, the Norwegian Nobel Committee wishes to turn the eyes of the world towards the millions of people who suffer from or face the threat of hunger. The World Multilateral Cooperation on Making Food Security an instrument of peace and has made a strong contribution towards mobilizing UN member states to combat the use of hunger as a weapon of war and conflict. The organization contributes daily to advancing the fraternity of nations referred to in Alfred Nobel's will. As the UN's largest specialized agency, the World Food Programme is a modern version of the peace congresses to promote. The World Food Programme, the work of the World Food Programme to the benefit of humankind is an endeavor that all nations of the world should be able to endorse and support. Thank you very much.
The Royal Norwegian Ambassador to Nigeria, His Excellency Knut Eveling, sends his apology as he is unable to attend this evening dialogue as originally scheduled. This is due to an urgent matter that has to do with his ministry. We'll move ahead to invite our panelist, Mr. Samuel Eremi, to make his presentation. Mr. Samuel Eremi is a consultant, rural and agricultural development. He has worked for IFAD Agricultural Development in Somalia, Sierra Leone, Ethiopia, Kenya, Tanzania, Eritrea, and Nigeria. He also worked for the World Bank in Malawi, Uganda, Philippines, Ghana, and Ghana. Mr. Eremi is eminently qualified to discuss agricultural matters, and we are very pleased to have him as a panelist tonight to discuss the achievements of the World Food Programme and their humanitarian effort to combat hunger. With him is Dr. Miriam Temitokwe Masha. Dr. Masha will serve as our moderator tonight. She is currently Senior Special Assistant Humanitarian Interventions to the President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria. In that position and for many years, she has designed interventions for internally displaced persons in Nigeria, particularly Northeast region that has been affected by the terror of Boko Haram. Dr. Samuel Eremi, good evening, sir. You have the floor.
Good evening, all. I want to express my gratitude to the board and management of the Initiative for Information Arts Culture Development in Nigeria, IACD. I also want to express my appreciation to my mentors, two of whom I would like to mention today, Professor John Sin Ekbere and Professor Joseph Yayok, for the encouragement they gave me to accept this invitation at very short notice. One theme that dominated yesterday's session on the Nobel Prize for Literature was simplicity. It featured in all the comments made by the eminent professors of literature and others on the very fantastic presentation made by Professor Sally Ball on the 2020 Nobel Prize for Literature that was won by Professor Louis Gluck. Then in my morning devotion today, I had one of the greatest mentors of the earth, Paul, telling his son, Timothy, to admonish the people. He said, tell the people, godliness with contentment is great gain. For we brought nothing into the world, and we can take nothing out of it. But if we have food and clothing, we will be content with that. People who want to get rich fall into temptation and a trap, and into many foolish and harmful desires that plunge men into ruin and destruction. The presentation today is titled The Rough Road to Nobel. And as we proceed with this presentation, you will see how our collective lack of simplicity and contentment as individuals, in our families, in our communities, and in our nations have fetched the World Food Program, WFP, this year's Nobel Prize for Peace. You see what the citation for WFP was this year. It got the prize for its efforts to combat hunger, for its contribution to bettering conditions for peace in conflict-affected areas, and for acting as a driving force in efforts to prevent the use of hunger as a weapon of war and conflict. And what is this WFP we are talking about? WFP is one of the Rome-based agencies. Starting from the end of the Second World War in 1945, the Food and Agricultural Organization, FAO, was established. Its mandate was to improve nutrition, increase agri production, and raise the standard of living in rural areas. 16 years later, in 1961, WFP was established with a mission to end global hunger and provide food assistance at the onset of emergencies, as well as promote economic and social development. Here we find that WFP is the only one of the 3 Rome-based food agencies that is always in the front line of conflict. 16 years later, I don't know the magic about 16, the International Fund for Agricultural Development was established with a mandate to eradicate poverty and hunger by investing in poor rural people through financial and technical assistance for their projects. A few quotes about peace. Johnson says, peace is a journey of 1,000 miles, and it must be taken one step at a time. We do not have a choice. It's a journey we must undertake. And the World Food Program itself said during the award of the Nobel Peace Prize, until the day we have a medical vaccine, food is the best vaccine against chaos. I know before the end of this year, Some countries are going to have the COVID-19 vaccine, but that will not let them get out of the grip of hunger around the world. I'm going to make some hypotheses around what I call the hunger conflict cycle. The first is that hunger plays a major role in fueling instability. People that have nothing to eat may easily resort to negative coping strategies or even illegal practices. Of course, they have to fulfill the needs of their families. The EndSARS in Nigeria, the violence that followed the EndSARS is a case in point. The second is that conflict and insecurity, along with climate shocks and natural disasters and their economic effects, are the main drivers of hunger. We readily recall the more than 40 farmers that were killed in Borno State in Nigeria. These were people who had been in IDP camps and had returned to their home in order to take care of the hunger that was biting them. And lo, when the harvest was mature and they were gladly going back to their farms to harvest their crops, they were brutally murdered. One of the executive directors for WFP says, we can't end hunger unless we put an end to conflict. I get very worried. The conclusion I draw from all this is that it is impossible to achieve the UN Sustainable Development Goal of zero hunger by 2030 without ending armed conflict. We shall look at a few quotes on hunger, greed, and peace. Mahatma Gandhi said, the world has enough for everyone's need. That is hunger also, but not enough for everyone's greed. And Imad Khan said, the greed never ends, even when the peace has come. And I think most of us are witnesses to the fact that even when the war has come to an end, people are still greedy. And Habirar Mana says, the air we breathe today is still free, but for how much time, we don't know. He believes that someone is very busy right now patenting it to start selling it for profits. That is the greed of man. You will see a few pictures. I wouldn't say anything. The faces of hunger and greed. I'll give you a few seconds to look at the photographs and draw your own conclusions. Let's come closer to Nigeria. On the screen, you see two pictures of the looting that followed the EndSARS protests. On the right-hand side, on the left-hand side, you can see people even on the roof of the building. At the end of the looting, we had a number of comments. The first is that looting is not caused by hunger, but by greed. We had another news item that said hoodlums loot NYSC camp in Abuja. And yet another comment that there is nothing moral or justifiable about the looting spree. It is a show of shame to our collective nationhood and betrayal of our civility. And on the right-hand side, you see children that look fairly well clothed due to the kindness, generosity of some humanitarian agencies. They are still struggling for food in our country. Now, to understand what WFP does, I'm going to read what a young man, Felicien, said. And at the end of this screen, I would like you to reflect, possibly in your charts, what nationality you think Felicien belongs to. Felicien said in 2014, "My family is fragmented. My mother is in Uganda. My brothers are in Tanzania and Burundi. But I'm thankful that I'm here. Malawi is peaceful. And with the food assistance I receive, I can now think about taking care of my future and continue with my education." Felicien was talking in the Zaleka refugee camp, which was hosting about 40,000 refugees. Felicien in 2014 was 21 years of age. He was born in a refugee camp in Tanzania after his parents fled conflict in their country, Burundi. He has lived all his life crisscrossing borders, moving from one refugee camp to the next. In search of his father, he walked 1,000 miles across different countries. From Tanzania, he went back to Burundi. From Burundi, he went to Malawi, and that was where he found his father. While Malawi enjoys a relatively peaceful environment, it is affected by the conflicts from other parts of the continent, and it has responsibility now for hosting refugees and asylum seekers from these countries. They have fled their countries because of conflicts and insecurity. And what is the World Food Programme doing? It is working with the government of Malawi, just like in every other country where WFP is operating, and with various partners to provide food assistance to the refugees, helping to contribute to peaceful coexistence with the host communities. You can now start sending through the chat what nationality is Felicien. The cost for WFP has been enormous. The first picture shows a WFP convoy that was attacked in Nigeria in 2017, leaving 4 people dead. On the right, there was another attack on a WFP convoy in South Sudan, just in October 2020. 1 humanitarian worker was killed and others were injured. Meanwhile, the refugees were waiting for their food at the center. On the left, you have a WFP convoy that was hit by an improvised explosive device, injuring several people in Iraq only in August 2020. And on the right, you have a WFP vessel that was attacked after it has delivered its shipment. The engine room of the vessel caught fire, This was in Yemen in 2018. In Ethiopia in 2011, a WFP staff mission to monitor the distribution of food in Ethiopia's Somali region was ambushed. One staff died, one was injured, and two were declared missing. The dead driver has been serving WFP's sub-office in the Somali region since 2006, and he is survived by his wife and 7 children. On the right, you find a WFP hired cargo plane crash that occurred at the airport in South Sudan. These are the costs of WFP serving humanity. My conclusion is that collectively, you and I have awarded WFP the Nobel Prize for Peace in 2020 because of our greed, because of our insensitivity to one another. And I'm leaving this seminar with a commitment. I will also leave you to make your own commitment. For me, my commitment to the WFP Nobel Prize for Peace is that WFP should not receive a peace prize again. And to help achieve that, I want to shun greed. I will fight corruption. I will fight violence in any form. I will fight food wastage. I will fight border closures that do not allow for equitable distribution of much needed food. And I will fight every semblance of using food as a weapon, whether it's in an international war, a domestic conflict, in the refugee or IDP camps, even in our homes. And I commit to fostering the humanity of man. We are all human beings. I commit to equity. I commit to security of property and lives. I commit to improved agricultural production and productivity. And above all, I commit to the employment, especially of our youth, because that is a very big opportunity to get people out of hunger and poverty. I thank you very much. I'm done with the presentation.
Femi, will you please invite Dr. Marsha to take over from here, please?
Take this one.
Yeah. Dr. Marsha, please take over.
Thank you very much, and good evening to everyone. Dr. Sam, thank you very much for that presentation, and he has charged us with a number of things. What is your commitment? He's made his commitments. What is yours? Is it to humanity, equity, security? What is it? Are we shunning violence and greed and corruption in an attempt to ensure that there is peace? My role here is to take on the questions, and while we wait for that, and I have asked that people should kindly share their questions in the chat box so that would allow us forward the questions to the speaker. While we wait for that, I would just talk a little bit about the whole context, the context. If we're looking at peace, we're looking at insecurity, development, lack thereof, and how they are kind of intertwined. There's a World Bank report that says that by the year 2030, which is just about less than 10 years now, if we're wrapping up 2020, by the year 2030, we have 80% of the, two-thirds, of the world's poorest countries would be experiencing some form of violence, would be in fragile and conflict settings. Here in Nigeria, we are already experiencing some parts, so we're experiencing that in some parts of the country in the Northeast. And that's a situation that's been going on for over a decade now. We know that conflict is one of the drivers of fragility. We also know that climate change is one of the drivers, but it's been reported that conflict will drive up to 80% of all the fragile situations across the world. And this is particularly in low and middle income countries. What we are experiencing here, the role I would speak to what the WFP has also been able to do in support of supporting Nigeria. With the conflict in the Northeast, we've seen the devastating humanitarian impact, and we also risk losing developmental gains. This has been compounded with COVID, with the pandemic, which suddenly hit us. And in a situation where we already are experiencing some fragile situations, where we're dealing with a humanitarian conflict crisis, to now have COVID jump right in also set us back a bit. And with interventions like the lockdown, which was necessary to curb the spread, we also saw that had an impact on the economy and livelihood, particularly all across board really, but particularly amongst those who are already vulnerable. We've seen how vulnerability itself is a risk, how fragility is a risk, and how these affect development within any community or a nation or state or a nation, as it were. If I'm to speak to the interventions that we've done, I would want to jump quickly into WFP's role with us and why I see the importance of their recognition this time around. And if we read their mandate or their mission, as it were, their efforts is to combat hunger, and this is done directly by them, tackling food insecurity. So the UN's instruments to target or address poverty. Food insecurity, and so that's on the one hand. And they're also contributing to bettering the conditions for peace in conflict-affected areas. One of the things that we've seen with the operations of WFPs, beyond the provision of the food and such assistance, they also work in building resilience within communities. They've been able to do a number of things, from the logistics and supply chain. They've also been able to work in areas of providing social intervention, social protection, the use of data for interventions like food and cash transfer programs. which have also helped in building resilience in some of these communities where people are otherwise vulnerable. And we've seen that the work that has been done actually leans directly into the operationalization of the humanitarian development peace nexus, because we have seen, especially in situations where there have been protracted crises, it's not enough to just address in silos the humanitarian needs and think that that would end and then we move into development and then we move into peace. We've seen that peace is cross-cutting. It's important, it's the foundation, and then as we do that, and we make the peace, we build the peace, we sustain the peace, then we also, at the same time, we're looking at addressing the immediate humanitarian needs, which they have also been able to do by directly addressing the issues of food insecurity, but also looking at the stabilization. And stabilization also comes with, they're sourcing foods locally, they're ensuring that the local economy is not compromised, while also also trying to serve or provide assistance. One of the interesting things is during COVID, as we've seen, it has been a disruptor, but the WFP has been able to, even before COVID and still within COVID, been able to reach hard to reach areas, inaccessible areas in, at least I can speak to the Northeast region. And so they've been able to provide the logistics to reach those areas. And one of the things that we've seen is that, and lessons drawn from that, is by the time that we do have a vaccine for COVID-19, it will be interesting to see how we will probably be learning from them, and it'll be interesting to see how we will be able to distribute to across the country, particularly in areas that we do know are hard to reach. So that there's a lot of things that we have learned. They've been instrumental in knowledge sharing, and the strong partnership with the state as well as with the federal government. So sharing knowledge, providing support, and knowing that they can't do it alone, neither can we. So I want to again congratulate them, and then knowing that the recognition they have gotten from, given the award is beyond just the recognition, but it helps to shine a light on a very important issue, which is the issue of the disruption in peace, if you'd like. It's the issue of conflict, and it's something that if we do not address it, it's a looming global crisis that we can see, almost touch and feel, because it's very close, and it's something that can be addressed. And so given that award has gone beyond just a recognition, but also is to get us to begin to think, and I guess that's probably my own commitment at this point, is to begin to think along the lines of what do we do, and how do we prevent a looming global crisis from conflicts, and of course fragility from a number of reasons, either from conflict itself or from climate change and other such disruptors. Those were the things I just wanted to add to the presentation already made, and wait for questions from anyone who may have one or two things to clarify, or even comments from our participants. Any questions or comments from anybody?
Dr. Marsha, you can build it out.
Right. I've made a contribution, or a few contributions, so I'll be happy to have the questions start rolling in so that our speaker can provide some okay, there we go. It looks like, okay, this is just to also say that please type your questions in the chat box, and I will be reading them out for Dr. Sam. Ambassador Olukoni, did you have a question? I thought I saw you raise your hand. Ambassador, you're muted.
Well, thank you very much. I've been unmuted now. Well, thank you very much now for the explanation and giving us an idea of what's going on ground and in cooperation with WFP. And I'm asking my question against the background of my own experience from having been worked with a large number of some of the UN agencies. And sometimes what happens is that, yes, there is a lot of cooperation at the federal level. But the states, most of at the state level, subnational level, many of them seem not to be able to, I don't know what happens, to live up to it, in terms of their own role. What has been your own experience on ground between the link between the WFP and the respective states, themselves? Because if we look at Northeast and what is happening in that particular place, where the WFP, what role has the state played, the state government themselves played? Have they lived up to the responsibility in terms of their own role? I'm just curious. And like I said, I'm saying this against the background of my own experience of having, trying to get state government to key and play their own part in terms of many of these UN agencies are concerned. Thank you.
Dr. Sam, would you like to start with that, or I can shed some light based on my experience, but I'll leave it open for you to start with.
I guess, Dr. Masha, you have the floor, because this is your area.
Okay, since I have the permission, the kind permission of the key speaker, I would do my best to address that. I'm speaking from my experience now, and if I speak to at least Borno State, which is the epicenter of this of the crisis that we have up north, there has been cooperation between the states and the WFP. I think there were initially that it's not something that we were prepared for. That's the whole. That it's not something we're prepared for. It's not something that. I think we struggled with knowing what to do initially as well, and it may not have been considered an issue of, and I probably should say this very carefully. I wouldn't want to be misquoted, but it was something that we struggled with dealing with. But in terms of the coordination, we've had a number of actors, the state actors, even the federal government actors as well. And then we had the UN agencies, we had NGOs. It was a proliferation of so many people and so many different bodies within that space. So coordination is still a beast today, but we've tried to align objectives. Interestingly, I was in Kano. I came in from Kano yesterday, and what we were doing there was it was a technical working group on the national humanitarian coordination, and what we have is all the actors, many of the actors as we can from the INGO space, the UN side, and the relevant actors within the government organization and at the state level as well. So the system is set up that at the federal level is to have a plan of sorts, a guide or policy, as which can be then domesticated in the different states. A state like Borno had been ahead and set up its own. It has its own strategic plan, 25 years. It has its own coordination mechanisms on ground, and there is an arrangement between the state governments an organization like the WFP and even the federal government. So there are areas where there might be challenges to reach, or we have issues in getting there or access that we may not have the logistics to be able to do that. And this is, I'm speaking with the state levels when I say we. But once, understanding the weaknesses within that system and then allowing those who can actually perform that has to do that. And I think there's been a good cooperation between the systems and the state government, at least in Borno, which is the epicenter. And at the federal level, one of the things that we struggled with was not having a central coordinating body, if you like. So now that there's a ministry that focuses on humanitarian affairs, it's easier to have that coordination done because it's at the highest level of government, which is the Federal Executive Council level, unlike what had happened in the past where it was agencies and that were trying to lead this. And it wasn't viewed from that lens of, it's no longer just an incident, but it's a protracted situation that has gone on for years. So you can't saddle, the mandate of the agencies then, it's now almost being modified. So it's, you have an agency like NEMA, for instance, which took on that responsibility for a very long time. So you see it struggling with other emergencies, a flood somewhere or fire, the resources are then all channeled towards the Northeast. But now that there's a ministry, that coordination mechanism is being worked out. And I think it's one of the things we're looking at and also emphasizing is that when we look at coordination, it's not necessarily trying to get everyone retrofitted into a box, but the idea is to look at our goal and see how individually we align with that goal and we're able to deliver. So I think it's working out, it's smoothing out now. It's like combing through very tough hair. It's smoothing out now, and it's still a work in progress.
Let me just make a comment here. It's the responsibility of the UN resident coordinator in any country to coordinate the activities of all the UN agencies. And in many places where WFP has worked effectively, this coordination has been supported by the host government. In a situation where you have conflicts at the national and subnational level, I think it behoves much of the national level to take control of its coordination mechanism.
Thank you, sir. There is a question from Roger Obudo, and his question reads this: what kind of measures are being taken to ensure greater safety for staff playing this crucial role of providing food to victims of conflict and violence?
Thank you, Roger. Under the UN conventions, the host government is responsible for the safety, security of all UN staff. This is effected in most countries that I've been to by the host government providing security to cover the operations of agencies like WFP. So if WFP is to be effective, and for that matter, any other agency is to be effective and minimize this sacrifice of loss of lives and assets, the host government should play its responsibility of providing security. Within the UN system, there is provision that staff should not go to certain areas which are classified as high-risk areas. The WFP, by its mandate, has to reach the front line and operate in the front line. And it will be very helpful in any country where WFP is operating that the host government provides the required security to enable WFP to achieve its mandate.
Thank you, sir. The next question is from Jide Adepope. And the question goes, what is the prognosis of some positive movements after diagnostics linked to NSAIDs with food matters? Has WFP intervened in any way going forward?
Can I also plead with Dr. Masha to take a shot at this?
Okay, I am honestly trying to understand the question actually. So I'm struggling with it a bit because I'm trying to understand what exactly it is that is being asked here.
Maybe I can explain the question.
Yes,
and you
maybe
take it
that
up from
can
there.
help me. Yes, please.
I think the person is asking about WFP's involvement in the calamity that followed the NSAS protests.
Okay, I can't speak for WFP, but I don't think it's something that they are involved with or would be involved with at this time. Given the fact that there was a protest, there was I'm struggling with how to answer this, to be honest, because I'm just trying to see what the correlation is, and I honestly can't.
Okay, let me come in here. The mandate of WFP is contingent on the acceptance by the host government. And in situations that border maybe on political issues, WFP has to be very careful about its intervention. For instance, WFP can only go to an IDP camp with the understanding of the host government, with the permission of the host government. In a situation like we had in Nigeria after the violence, it will be very difficult for WFP to go into violent affected areas without the necessary authorization from the government of Nigeria.
Dr. Masha,
Okay.
I have a comment privately sent to me by Peter.
Okay.
And I've asked him to send, I don't know if he's trying to do that, but let me read it out to you. He said, it's part of the problem that various nations have abandoned rural agriculture in pursuit of hard currency products such as oil, gas, or even palm oil for export. I remember in my first visit to Nigeria some 30 plus years ago, even then some were bewailing the absence of local palm oil products because of the rush into developing the oil industry. An alternative example was that in Senegal, it was easier to buy imported tomatoes from the EU, even though the local product was to be found with the roadside sellers. Maybe a tribal question, but national agricultural good is only possible in small steps. Thank you, EU, he wrote.
Thank you very much, Peter, for that comment, and I think it's valid. And one of the things that we're trying to do now as a government is to go back to agriculture. And I think it's also important that I think we just kind of got carried away with oil. And now we have to retract our steps and go back. And we've seen how it impacts everything. It's some of the situations we're experiencing now, food insecurity, and we're still going to have a lot more of that with climate change. We are having, we're struggling with the farmer-herder conflict as well. In the Northeast, where it's predominantly farming, with the conflicts now, we're also struggling with that. So our oil isn't going to get us anywhere. I think I agree with you completely.
I recall my experience when I was still a child. This was immediately after the Nigerian Civil War, very unfortunate. The same thing we've been saying about conflict and hunger. I noticed that immediately after the Civil War, when oil production started picking up in Nigeria, the people that used to go to the farm, go to the rivers and seas to fish, all abandoned the farms. And what did they do? They went to the cities to take up jobs as security men, gate men. We also have a country where we are told that the seeds, the palm oil seeds, that is making Malaysia a major exporter of palm oil, actually came from Nigeria. Where did we miss it? Our priorities, greed, corruption. Climate change will always be there, and it will affect all equally. How do we respond to the impact of climate change? What support are we giving to protect the farmers so that they can go to the farms and have a non-reoccurrence of what has happened in Borno State? There is a lot of soul searching we have to do. We need to be sincere to ourselves, whatever level we may be in, at the highest level of government and at the lowest level of the people.
Thank you, Doctor. The question by Jide, he added a follow-up question where he says, beyond the WFP, the question centers on what the society is doing to address and prevent another eruption of hunger-driven violence, which may be more violent and destructive the next time.
Again, I'm sure Dr. Masha is in the best position to answer that.
Okay, I would respond to Jide, but I just wanted to just clear a little bit that, you know, if you are referring to the end SARS, it wasn't a hunger-driven violence. So that's just to clear that. But I hear you if you are talking about food security or food insecurity, as it were, but just to clear that. And a number of initiatives, one of the focal areas of the administration is on agriculture. And there have been a number of initiatives that have been put up through the CBN, the Ministry of Agriculture, the Ministry of even social development, social intervention programs towards getting people back to farms and supporting the whole value chain, the agro-allied value chain. It's also going back to the beginning, going back to the basics and providing the right institutional support and the resources that will be required to get people back to farming and to provide the security that is required for that. A number of challenges, of course, that we're dealing with because of some of the areas where they're huge, where they're pastoral farmers, we are still dealing with insecurity in those areas. And so I think it still comes back to what Dr. Sam had said earlier, you know, where we're looking at the relationship between hunger and peace and development and security. So while these initiatives are on, it's important to also provide the right, not even interventions, because this will serve as interventions, but to have state building to to renew the social contract with people and trust. The trust deficit has been broken, so that we can begin to build again as a nation. So I think it's a lot of work, and it also speaks to some of the areas of commitment that Dr. Sam mentioned earlier as well. We need to take this seriously, and I think steps are being taken, but things don't happen in silos. So while we might have the programs, like I said earlier, if we cannot secure the places where people can actually, farm, and then we support again the whole value chain. Is not just enough to farm, and then we don't have how do we store, how do we transport. If you go to some of these areas up north, you find that yes, food is being produced, but they're wasting along the ways. You see that in Benue, you see that in Taraba. And Taraba is, I joke about it, that you put your fingers in the soil, your nails will grow, but if we do not have the value chain and we don't have the right support, it still doesn't amount to much. So those things must also be in place. And I think that steps are being taken. We would love them to move faster, but I would leave it as a work in progress.
May I add also that I believe that inequity is at the core of the tensions that give rise to the hunger crisis in Nigeria. So at whatever level of influence we may be at, we should consider equity. And that is one of the commitments I made at the end of my presentation.
Okay, those are the questions we have for now. I don't know if anyone has any more comments or questions.
Maybe today's presentation is not as sexy as yesterday's presentation.
Thank you, Ms. Dr. Sam Eremi. Dr. Sam Eremi, thank you very much for your presentation. I'm sure that we all enjoyed the presentation. Hunger is something that we can all relate to here in Nigeria, and I'm sure that that's maybe we understand your presentation more than you think we did. So thank you very much, sir, for that presentation. And Dr. Masha, I think we have one more comment from Dr. Jide Adefopo, if you want to please handle that before we move on with the evening.
Right, okay, I'll read it out. It's I think it's a comment, if I'm right. And it says that one may say that the situation of the country being able to feed itself is merely a hope for the present.
Yeah. It's better for you to die than to have no hope. And it is when you have hope and you combine it with works that you can achieve your goal.
Yes.
Thank you for that. You said that the presentation maybe wasn't sexy, but we have Edem Osai here saying that it was highly sexy, sir. You made it so explanatory that there are no questions on my mind.
Yes.
Thank you for stressing again the feedback loop between hunger and conflict. So that's from her as well. Well, that's from Edem.
Thank you.
I guess, Dr. Remy, I guess we round off the program now, the session now, since we have no questions coming in. And I'd like to thank you on behalf of ICD Nigeria for that very explanatory presentation. And our moderator, Dr. Miriam Masha, I thank you so much for steering the course of the conversation tonight. Special thanks to Ambassador Ayola Ulukani for accepting to chair this session. Special thanks also to Ambassador Dikbeolu, Ambassador Tommy Olumoko, Professor Johnson Ekwere, Professor J.Y. Yayok. We thank our sponsors, the Dawn Commission, Zatec Limited, and the Booksellers Limited. We thank you all for joining us for the past 6 days, discussing the groundbreaking accomplishments of this year's Nobel laureates and the relevance of their significant work to humanity. I'd like to please hand over to Professor Ayo Banjo, is our Chairman, Board of Trustees, IACD, to officially declare our Nobel 2020 Nobel Week Dialogue closed. Professor Banjo, it's my honor, sir. Good evening, sir.
I think you need to unmute him.
Please unmute your microphone. Professor Banjo, please unmute your microphone, sir. Professor Banjo, we can't hear you. You have to please unmute.
Is that okay now?
Yes, yes, it's better now. Thank you very much.
That's okay now, right?
Yes, sir, that's fine.
Right. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, wherever you may be listening to us or watching what's been going on, not just tonight, but from Monday of this week. Now, it gives me enormous pleasure to say a few words of appreciation to all those who have been involved in this, well, unique program. I don't think the Nobel Prize has, well, the whole series of prizes, I don't think they've had as much attention paid to them as has been done this week. Now, my first expression of appreciation would naturally go to the sponsors of the whole program. And let me start with Dr. Raymond Zard. Many of you may not know that Dr. Zard is affectionately referred to in this part of the country as the ray of hope. And I dare say that he has lived up marvelously to that sobriquet on this occasion. Our most grateful thanks go to him. Now, the planning and execution of this program were done by the Initiative for Information, Arts, and Culture Development here in Ibadan. The president of the organization, Dr. Kolade Mosuro, and the executive director, Mrs. Femi Bokna-Rigbede, deserve our admiration and thanks for pulling off an event of such international and for international measure. We thank them for doing this on behalf of the center itself. Now, I think by now you've heard something about the purpose of IACD. Basically, I think you can say that a number of private individuals got together and decided to add value to the city of Ibadan, which already is well known as the intellectual capital of Nigeria. I think the event of this week has put Ibadan a notch higher than before. And we are deeply indebted to Dr. Kolade Mosuru and Mrs. Femi Bokmarigwede for making this possible. My thanks also go to all those who have played parts in ensuring that this week had been possible. I thank you all. And now for the participants, the discussants, those who've given us papers, who have ensured the success of the program. I'd like to thank them all very much indeed, starting from those who have participated tonight and going back to Monday. I'd like to express our appreciation to the Swedish ambassador. It's only appropriate that since we are talking Nobel, the Swedish government should take an interest. And we are glad that the Swedish ambassador has given us proper support. And then finally, our very own Nobel laureate, Professor Emeritus Wole Soyinka, Nigeria's shining star in the firmament of Nobel laureates. We are glad he has been able to give support to this program. And we take this opportunity of congratulating him on the publication of his latest book. I think, in fact, somewhere around here in Ibadan, the presentation will be made in the course of next week. And we assure him that we are all eagerly waiting to read that book. Once more, I thank you all and hope you will similarly participate in our future activities, whether national or global. Thank you very much for your support, and good night. that